I got blown into a room. I'm laying on the ground and I'm dazed and confused and believing that I'm dead. And I rallied, and in the process of rallying, I go up next to this window that I'd gotten blown through, and one round just misses my eye by like an inch and a half. I'm like, ooh. So I'm in the room. I hold up actually it was a bucket, and one round right through the middle of the bucket. And I'm like, okay, due to the angle of that impact, that's that hill that I'd been watching the whole day. I'm like, damn, 635 yards away. Okay. He knows where I am, but I now know where he is. So can I get to him before he gets to me? The only time I've ever felt fear is in that moment. Like I was crippled. Like I couldn't get my heart to stop.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today, we hear the combat story of Thom Shea, retired Navy SEAL, sniper, and senior chief who led SEALs in multiple combat tours from Kosovo to Iraq to Afghanistan, including brutal fighting in Helmand Province, for which he was awarded the Silver Star. He was also the officer in charge of the famed SEAL sniper course. Since leaving the Navy, Thom and his wife Stacy conduct intensive leadership events for Fortune 500 companies, and he has written 2 books, including an incredible memoir, Unbreakable, that gives a first-hand account of the life of a SEAL in combat. His books and this interview are chock full of lessons for leaders and soldiers alike. If you enjoyed Todd Opalski's interview, you're going to love Thom's story and way of life. Hey, Thom, thanks for taking the time to share your story with us.
I appreciate any opportunity to improve somebody's life. So thank you.
And I can tell, I just wrapped up Unbreakable, one of your books, and just as a note, as I interview folks, I try to read through at least one of their books, and I'll take screenshots on my Kindle as I'm reading at night and circle things that I want to go back to as I prepare. And usually I get about 10 or 15 pages, and in yours I had 45 screenshots, no joke. I think there's
because
lot.
I can't spell. I get it.
I didn't see a single typo, Thom, so I was very impressed with that.
Must have been the 8th edit.
In all seriousness, I think it was chock full of not just your experiences in combat, but like life lessons, lessons for soldiers, for leaders, family, across the board. Couldn't recommend it enough. So I'm really eager to dive in. I want to start out with something that I read in the book about one of your jobs as a kid as an outfitter and your experience hunting as a child. Just because I think we see people in the special ops community, the SEALs, Rangers, Delta, and there's this thing that comes to my mind, having not been in that community, that you just grew up with a weapon. Other people I've interviewed were not that way, but I think you may have just had a slightly different path. So please talk to me about that.
Yeah, a lot of questions that couldn't be answered there. I grew up in southern Indiana in like a farm town. There was either alcohol or what? I mean, you didn't get the choice. So you drank alcohol and you played football or you were in band and you hunted whether you were male or female. And I say that because in the 70s and early 80s, that may have been the greatest time to be a kid in America. You could carry a knife because you never fought with a knife. Like I had a knife on me until like even this morning, and I would never draw a knife to fight somebody. It doesn't occur to me to do that. And when I was in high school, we literally had our muzzle loaders, bow and arrow, shotguns, rifles in our cars. And everybody did it. And it wasn't taboo. And there, people used to carry guns and that used to be okay. And so I grew up during that time. And it was about the only period of time, and maybe it wasn't by choice. And I don't mean to stumble through this. When I was 9 in the wintertime, there was nothing to do. It was cold. And my buddies and I ran a trap line trapping mink, muskrat, raccoons, fox, and coyote when I was 9. I remember getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and Dad didn't know what the hell anything was. So if you want to do it, you got to do it the right way, and you got to pay for it yourself. And so I'd get up at 4, run my trap line, come back, go to school. At the end of the day, go back and reaffirm the traps and clean this and skin that. And that's what I did. And I remember making $6,000 when I was 9 years old running trap.
No way.
And so I grew up outside constantly shooting, and I probably killed birds. Yeah, they didn't need to die, but kids do that, and it let me be very comfortable with the shooting, killing side of what I think was. And you're right. I 50 and I trained a lot of snipers and a lot of SEALs, and 50% of them had never touched a gun until they got to the SEAL teams. But I enjoyed it. I loved hunting. And when I had my first screw up, having failed out of West Point, I went up to Canada and I was a canoeing and fishing guide for a summer season because
That's
it
the
was easy
outfitter.
at an outfitter. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Jeez.
And I grew up outside, so I never felt uncomfortable out there. And to me, it's relaxing to get away from everything. And my sons are becoming closer to it, but the bugs and I never had any trouble with bugs. I must stink or something. I don't know, but I'll sit right next to you, and you'll be covered in mosquitoes, and I won't get a bite. And
They
maybe
just know
that's
better.
the price of being an operator or a warrior is you have a stink that nothing likes you probably.
When you were a kid and you were out hunting, what's one of your more memorable experiences at that time? Like, were you typically on your own, it sounds like, or was your dad taking you out sometimes?
Probably both, but the most memorable experience is uh, I still have that, and I took that into being a SEAL leader. Is the inordinate amount of time you have to wait in one position, and I remember waiting because I used to be a stupid hunter. I would wait and never get out of the woods. Like I would stay there, and in my brain, I'm like, if I outweight them, they're going to make a mistake. And I remember, I think I was 16 at the time, deer hunting in Indiana, and it was probably 20 degrees outside. And I had got in the woods at 5 in the morning, and by 4 o'clock at night, so 4 p.m., I peed and maybe had a drink. But I remember being so cold, I was miserable. And in that last minute, right before I was about ready to quit and called in, one of the biggest deer I've ever killed walked out. And I taught my SEALs that technique of sitting and waiting and sitting and waiting. And I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
to me, in my brain, hunting is about who's going to outweight who.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. So I don't want to lose this one thread that you mentioned earlier, and it may be appropriate later on, but you mentioned as you were training snipers in the SEALs, about 50% came in without any experience with a weapon. Did you notice, is it better to come in with some experience, or is it better to have somebody who's starting fresh and you can just teach them your own technique from the get-go?
It's better to have no experience in your shooting skills, but they cannot teach you how to hunt, and they can't teach you the uncomfortableness of killing. So if most of the guys who were good at, I may not sound weird. It probably sounds weird. Somebody saying killing, but that's the business of you're in the SEAL teams. You're there to kill people, and a lot of the world looks at that as toxic masculinity or whatever the hell that thing is. So all the great shooters that I trained had not touched a gun. So they did exactly what you were teaching them to do. The old guys like me, they had imperfections that you couldn't train away, but you're still a good shooter, but you're not technically a great shooter. Like Chris Kyle was not a good shooter. He wasn't. If you like, I could teach you to shoot better than Chris because he just wouldn't listen. He he wouldn't listen. He didn't need you telling him what to do. He had a lot of imperfections in his form and how he pulled the trigger and his breathing patterns. But he knew where to go to hunt, and he had no trouble squeezing the trigger when it was a bad thing. And a lot of guys can't be trained to do that. So the difference is, if you want to be a really great shooter, go have a coach that's the best in the world, which were the SEALs, and have them teach you, and you're going to be the best shooter in the world.
Yeah.
You may not ever pull the trigger because you may get scared. You can't teach not scared,
Yeah. So I'm curious about your father. You mentioned him. Did you come from a military family, Thom? Like, is that in the family background, or how did you find your way in? You mentioned West Point, so curious.
Horrifically military. From the Revolutionary War, I don't think there was a war that I know of that our family wasn't in. Either from my mom's side. My mom's side comes from the Custer family through
Jeez.
Tommy Custer, which was George's brother, and I named after him. And he was he's the one the Indians hated. George George was just a buffoon. I'm sorry, he was a buffoon. But Tommy was the real killer, and so I come from that line. My dad was a West Point grad, class of '59, and I knew my mother was the last of 11 kids, and all the males were in the military. My couple of my aunts were in the women Marines, so we sat around the table, talked openly about combat battles, being in the military, and it wasn't a big quantum leap for me to go into the military.
Was your dad must have done significant time in Vietnam, I would imagine, if he's
No, he
class of.
got out. He blew his knee out. So
Oh,
he went to
geez.
West Point, got injured, was in the artillery battery in Hawaii, and I think he may have post graduation been in for 2.5 years, and then they're like, "Bro, you can't move very well. Get out." And as much as he wanted to stay in, they wouldn't let him stay.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I
Um,
grew up going to West Point every year.
just going back because of his affinity for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a big transformative time for him. For me, I hated it when I went as a student, and
Yeah.
but big thing for him. I think it was his way out of a bad life, and took him 5 years to make it through. And all his friends were great men and great generals that I got to grow up knowing, and we went back to not every football game, but to watch a football game every year. And I grew up wanting to play football at West Point, and you get what you ask for. So I went there to play, and I never remember dreaming of graduating. That was my problem. But yeah.
Well, so you mentioned that kind of going into the military was almost something that you would just expect, it sounds like, in your family, but certainly going to West Point, big deal. For you to not make it through, what was that like for you and the family?
Oddly,
How hard was
Dad
that?
didn't even want me to go to West Point because growing up, he did, but I was an ass. Dad's like, "You're never going to get along in the military," and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And and then when I flunked out, it was more devastating on me than it was mom and dad. They're like, well, it's okay. You'll recover. I didn't feel like I was ever going to recover. And it felt like the end of the world. And what am I going to do? And I said, hey, I need time away from what I should be doing. And so I went to Canada. I didn't mean to go to Canada, but it was the only outfitter that would hire me. And so I literally spent the rest of that year living out in the woods with people that appreciated the outside and mentally recovered. But my mental recovery was I want to go be a SEAL.
Where did that come from?
I wanted to be a SEAL more than I wanted to go to West Point. And I grew up with a guy named Pat Tomlinson, who was my dad's battery commander, who had been when he was 17 was in the Scouts and Raiders, which were the precursors to the SEALs. He was the first guy on Iwo Jima when he was 17.
Jeez.
And so I grew up every summer hanging out with this guy and all his buddies that were of that vintage. And I loved their brains and what they talked about. Everybody else hated them, but I liked the comfort that they had with talking about killing people. I don't know why that was there for me. And then I said, Dad, I want to go in the SEAL program. And everybody doesn't remember this. This was before cell phones or before computers, and there was no information on anything. If you didn't know anybody, you didn't know anything about it. And I couldn't find any information enough to tell my dad about it other than he knew that it had about a 90% drop rate. And all the people he knew that had been in it, he thought were bad dudes, you know? And I was like, I want to do it out of high school. And he's like, no, that's not going to happen. You got to go to school. So when I hit rock bottom, I'm like, the best choice now is to go pursue that. And I tragically didn't know how to swim when I signed up for the SEAL program. And then it was just a series of learning through fire hoses, and it didn't work out for me then. It took me 5 times to make it through SEAL training.
And so actually I wanted to mention here, one thing that's great about your book is that it takes a little bit of the stereotype that people have of you're a SEAL, you've never failed, you've got to be this perfect specimen, no issues ever. And you really lay out that you had some difficulties. And then it's mixed in with some incredible work that you do when you're downrange and the way you build a team and what you've done since. So I certainly don't want to take away from that. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because, as you said, it's 85, 90% dropout rate. It took you 5 times. Hell, I didn't even know you went there when you couldn't even swim. So, you have the West Point washout. You try to make it in the SEALs. What are you doing in between each time you go and recycle back into the program?
Well, so out of West Point, go to Canada, find out that I can't stop thinking about it. Didn't know how to even sign up other than go to a recruiting office. Go home to dad and mom after my Canadian experience of chasing girls and you know how that never works out, you know what I'm saying? So now I'm home again. What am I going to do? He goes, well, you need to complete your college degree or I'll give you $20,000. Make your choice.
Wow.
And I'm like, fuck, what am I going to do with $20,000? That's not going to be helpful. And so I went back and completed my degree in sports medicine at Ball State. And my senior year is when I determined that I wanted to go in the SEAL program. And I'd found out enough information to think I was competent in doing it. So I signed up a year before I could actually show up because there was a delayed entry. Tragically, that's how the teams are. There's so many people that want to get in that you sign up and then a year later you show up, which weeds out a lot of people inherently. So I figured out when I signed up that I couldn't pass any of the tests upon signing up. And they gave me the first test, and I failed 3 of the 5 skills. And all it is push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, run, swim. I could run, and I couldn't do the pull-ups, and I couldn't pass the push-ups, and I couldn't pass the swim. And I passed the sit-ups, I think, something like that. And I'm like, dude, I got a long road ahead. And so I went to the pool, realizing I needed to learn how to swim. Like, you couldn't gut that out. That had to be technique. And for a year, I went to the pool every day.
Jeez.
And there was a female lifeguard that took pity on me and, can I teach you how to swim? This is embarrassing. And she's, I'm watching you, and this is totally embarrassing. And so she taught me the right technique. And once I figured it out, it became simple. And then I show up to SEAL training. And it's a great thing for youth to understand what happens when you show up to your dream. And I try to convey this when I talk, and even leaders, when you transition, here's what happens. Reality will stick. It's like when Tyson said, it's a great plan until somebody breaks your face open. So I show up to SEAL training, and the class that I was in was getting big. So when I showed up, there was 85 people already waiting to start. And then there's first phase, which had green helmets. There's second phase, which had blue helmets. So you could distinguish them by looking. And third phase had red helmets. So when there was 85 kids without helmets prepared to start, my introduction to that was seeing the third phase class, and there were 8 people left. I'm looking, I'm like, God, there's a lot of studs, 85 dudes here, and there's 8 guys remaining in training 6 months later. And I'm like, well, this ain't going to be what I thought it was. I thought it'd be a warrior training, and it did not care about what I thought it was going to be. And so I started with class 195, and it was a beatdown. They didn't care about you. They didn't care about your parents. They didn't care about your background. They didn't care if you were hurt, what you thought about, nothing. And they make it overwhelming from the time you start until the time you graduate. And I made it to Hell Week in 195 and got a concussion. And then they said, okay, when I woke up after my concussion, they had told me I had quit, and for me to sign a piece of paper. And I'm like, I don't think I quit. They're like, well, don't waste our fucking time with this. Sign this piece of paper because you're done anyway. Nobody ever recovers from this. And you're so far in training that no idiot would ever start over. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to quit. And they're like, okay, you get 2 weeks off, and you get to start at the beginning of first phase again. And so I had a 2-week vacation, and I went home, and the first thing my parents and friends said is, oh, you failed again.
Oh,
I was going to stay home for 14 days, and everybody was sad and, whoa, Tom, we feel sorry for you. And I'm like, I can't take it. I'm leaving. And so I went back to the training command so that I could be around guys that wanted to be there. And it was helpful mentally. And so I'm like, okay, start 196. And that was a tragic start. It was 10 times harder because I had something to compare it to. And the first day of training, the instructor staff didn't like the students, and they took it out on the students. And we had 32 people quit the first day because it was hard. I mean, they make it hard enough for an adult man to go, I confess, I'm out, you know. I make it to Hell Week in 196 and dislocate my shoulder. And so I'm sitting in the hospital, and a guy named Mike Mayer, who was a chief in training, came over and said, we don't think you're going to quit. We don't think it's possible to recover from your injury. So we're going to give you a whole class to physically recover. So instead of 2 weeks down, I think it was 7 weeks that I had to recover. And so I recovered and started. And 198 was an October start. And if anybody's been in San Diego, it's cold. Like the water is it's relentlessly cold. And I started, made it to Hell Week and got pneumonia. And they pulled me out 2 hours before the Wednesday forward cut, where if you make it to Wednesday night and you get an injury, you have the potential rolling forward. And they were even telling me, bro, make it to Wednesday night. Because we know you're not going to quit, but you just keep getting injured all the time. I couldn't make it. I said, I'm done. I didn't quit, but I just couldn't keep going. And they pulled me out of training and they put me in the hospital. And I had 5. So I had pneumonia. I was declared, dumbass with pneumonia. And then they said, well, here's the deal. Due to the timing of the next class starts on Monday. If you want to start, you don't have to take the entrance test, but you have to start Monday. I'm like, oh my God, I can't even do anything. It was easier recovering from a dislocated shoulder than it was pneumonia. So I get to 199 was my 4th class with pneumonia. I'm the worst student there. Like I can't do anything. And they don't care. They beat you like they're going to make you submit. If you fail, then they really try to make you submit. And I failed everything. But I was allowed to go into Hell Week again, and I was suffering and woke up in the I had passed out, woke up in the hospital, and they had kicked me out of training. Like you don't get a choice. You have scar tissue in your lungs, and you won't ever be able to pass the dive portion of training because of your lung tissue, and you're gone. See you. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I had a 2-week medical leave that I could go on. And instead of going home, I kind of went to some places that I thought were cool to hang out. And it wasn't helpful to go to these places because it doesn't encourage you, And so I went back and I called my dad's friend, Pat Tomlinson, told him what happened. And I said, I want to come down and see you. And when I saw him, he goes, hey, here's the deal. Either quit and never, ever go back and never talk about it to anybody else ever again, or try to make it back. I'm like, dude, it's a 2-year wait to get back. And he goes, who cares what anybody says? Do what you want to do, because if you're sitting here regretting it, you're going to have the worst life ever. I don't mean to make the story longer, but I decided at that moment in time I was going to every day, because I got a job at the hospital because I was a medic. And every day I went to the Admiral's office and sat there with a chit requesting access back to the SEAL program. And I got written up.
Sorry, Tom, you would just go sit there like, hey, I want to get back in. Here's
lunchtime. I sat in the Admiral's space with an official request piece of paper called a chit, requesting orders back to SEAL training. And I think it was a 4-day shift. It's because I was doing, I think, a 10-hour shift in the emergency room or something like that. And I would go during my lunchtime and sit there with the time that I had. And he, through the chain of command, had written me up 4 times because he said, I'm not going to sign it. The Navy won't let you go back for 2 years. That's what he showed me, this piece of paper, blah, blah, blah. For 2 years, the Navy has you because they need people too. And you can't just keep going back to these programs. And So I sat there and I went from E4 to E3 because I lost rank because I was disobeying a direct order every freaking day. And so 9 months in, and I was training like a fool. Like I was the best shape in my entire life ever. And like literally, I was blowing all the times away. I was fast swimmer. I could do 48 pull-ups without getting off the bar, and I was ready.
And Tom, sorry, you were in Coronado?
Coronado, yeah.
So you're like watching SEALs come in
Yeah,
and
yeah,
leave.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys I still knew because they're still around, and I became friends with some of the instructor staff because they're like, nobody's as stupid as you. Nobody ever does this 4 times, and so I'm sitting there one day, not really dejected, but knowing that he's not going to sign it. And he walks out, grabs a piece of paper, and signs it. Says, "Okay, if you want it bad enough, I'm not going to get in the way." So he
Damn.
signs a piece of paper. Like the next day, I have orders, and I remember reporting, and the instructor staff knew me, and they didn't say a word to me. They didn't. We're not going to yell at you. They said, "Hey, if you have any questions about what to do, be up to Hell Week. Just ask him. Don't come to us because we're not going to tell you." And but I had a bitter resentment to anybody that was doing well. Like if somebody was doing well, I'm like, I fucking hate you, man. So that was class 207, and formed up. We started with 111 guys and graduated 11.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
crazy. It's still the same problem.
Oh man. All right. I have a lot of questions, and I want to. This is a perfect segue. Now, in the book, you really talk about that last deployment you have, 2008, 2009, I think it
9.
is.
Yeah.
9.
Yep.
But you reference previous deployments. You just don't dive into them. So I want to get into one of those are really your first combat experience, Tom. But first, I think this might be a good time to talk about this internal dialogue.
Mm.
One is, could you just explain what that means to you? Because it comes up in the book a lot. And in the context of what we just talked about, did you recognize that at the time as you were going through this cycle of hell several times over? Or did it inform you at the time and it later became apparent that you have this voice talking to you?
It's two things. One is I recognized inherently when you do really hard things, it's not the difficulty of the thing that you do, it's how you beat yourself down mentally. So that's how I referenced it for a long time. But when I became clear that there was something learnable there, was because when you're in the SEAL teams, you actually are told go out and seek professional help. If you're a bad shooter, find the top shooters in the world and get better at it. And when you're in charge of a program, you get the authority to go and talk to the best of the best. So, in that process of learning from the top people in the world in whatever category, they all process things as whatever you tell yourself becomes true. I'm like, what do you mean? Whatever you tell yourself becomes true. And then I'm reflecting back on what it was like to go into Hell Week 5 times. And why didn't I quit when other people were quitting? And why do people do really well in things? And why do people suck at things? And is it genetics? Is it training and all that stuff? And I came to the realization that none of that was true. And the truth of it is you got to get really good at how you mentally and verbally process things. So if you say you can't, that's a truth. You cannot. And your body will go, yep, I cannot do that. If you say there's one more step, you'll pull off another step. If you say you can shoot something that you cannot see, you'll shoot something that you cannot see. And having taught snipers, everybody understand this: at a mile, you can't see the thing. Like visually, you can't see what you're shooting at. You're just telling yourself, if I do X, Y, and Z, the bullet will go where it's supposed to go, and you can't see anything. And but the top people in the world were only processing language, which is what I call internal dialogue. And the definition is what you say to yourself drives everything that you do. And it's learnable. And you probably should be doing it often to be specific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Thom, you kind of just, I guess I'm wondering, did you learn that when you were running the sniper program because you were talking to these elite performers? Or was it something you just understood after a deployment or two? When did you realize this was going on?
No, you get inadvertently taught it in SEAL training by one is by observing, and the other one is by a couple of the instructors are good dudes, and they all say it's mental. Like, hey, we're going to take the physical away from you. We're going to make sure physically you're not capable of doing anything that you want to do. Then what you're going to do mentally will make all the difference. And don't quit on yourself. Just stop quitting on yourself. And one of them came up and said, stop telling yourself anything. Turn off all the noise, all the chatter. It's never helpful, and it never will be helpful. And when I heard an instructor say that, I'm like, what the hell did he mean? Don't listen to the noise in your head. And now I look at that as be careful what's going on in your head, because it will take you directions. If you let it take you, it will always do the worst thing it can possibly do. But if you direct it, it will take you places that you weren't capable of achieving without learning language, like language, the structure of it. And what became true in analysis and in interviewing a bunch of people, the structure of successful language always begins with I am. And whatever you fill in there, you become. And then when you look at the human condition, you hear it everywhere. Probably, probably in pilot training too. People who don't think they're a good pilot, you'll prove it very quickly. We can't
Yeah.
fly in that storm. That means you say you're a sucky pilot. There's a dude up in Alaska that I can guarantee that's a CW05 that'll fly through the storm like it doesn't
Yes.
exist. And so I started learning that and trying to figure out how to like teach myself it and give it structure and give it an education, and then it became lethal.
Got it. All right, let's then jump to your first experience in combat that you certainly had been waiting for a long time with the way you described growing up, trying to get into the SEALs. You're finally there. Can you just kind of put us time and place? Like, where were you? What year was it? What role were you in at the time?
I was an E5, SEAL Team 2 sniper, and we were in the Adriatic Sea, and the air war in Kosovo had just kicked off that day. And we're like, wow, what the heck's going on? We didn't know anything was going on. And because there's always planning missions. We had done some missions that theoretically were going to lead into some invasion, but that goes on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Everything's always going to erupt, but it never does. So we're all of a sudden the air war kicks off, and we were called in to do the embassy rescue across the border in Macedonia. So a guy named Christopher Hill, who was the ambassador to Macedonia, had they lost contact with him. And so they spun us up because we were the only direct action force that had the ability to do something like that. The Marine fast units are theoretically supposed to be able to do that, but they can't really. So we went in as the the ones that were going to initially secure the embassy, grab the ambassador and leave, and then let the fast unit come in and do that. And so that day that we're probably 9:30 at night, going to be picked up in civilian clothes by a CH-53, which is a Navy helo that drains oil 24 hours a day.
Like
And
most helicopters, but
yeah.
yeah.
And so I'm watching the ship come across the aircraft come across the horizon and thinking, oh, wow, this is it. This is what it must feel like. And our platoon chief walks out and looks at us all and he goes, I doubt if we're all going to survive this. I love you guys. And then sat down. I'm like, what the fuck? Is that, what does that mean? Did I do something wrong? And so we mounted up the bird, and it was just a comical series of the dumbest things that could possibly happen. And we got picked up by the British SAS at the airport in Skopje, and they put us in a flatbed truck and drove us about 200 yards away from the embassy, which was ablaze, and dropped us off. And out, mates, we're out of here. So we get off, and there's no planning. You don't plan for any of that happening. We thought we were going to fast rope right into the compound, and it changed. And then so we get there to the compound, take it over, get in the building, couldn't find anybody. Then we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how, there's no playbook for anything.
Was it defended?
No, everybody was gone.
Oh man.
There
All
was
right.
nobody there. But there was a vault downstairs, and nobody told us about the vault. They didn't tell us about the bona fides or the code to get into the vault. So we realized, oh my God, there looks to be a space here in the wall. And one of the new guys opened up the door, and it was a downstairs stairwell. We get down there, and there was a red phone on the wall, and we grabbed the phone and picked it up, and somebody on the other end picked it up. I mean, it was really that way. Like, man, this is going to be the greatest movie that was ever written, because there was nothing going on in the world. Like, this was combat, and it was interesting. But we didn't fire any rounds. But we saw the atrocities of war, because if people don't remember this, the Serbs were going into Kosovo to kill all the ethnic Albanians, which were the Muslims. And they lined up on these border camps. Everybody was coming across from Kosovo into Macedonia. There's big border camps. And we went as an element without the ambassador to look at these border camps. And we were up on a hill overwatching them just to see if it was safe, because there was no U.S. presence there. It's just people bivouacking on the border, and then trucks coming in bringing food, but no U.S. presence there at all. So two of us went to watch it, and saw the guys line up all the fighting age males and shoot them in the head.
No way.
I was
Really?
like, oh my God, this is serious. And you don't plan for anything like that. So my first experience with combat was the most demonstrative one, not the violence of it, but if you're going to succeed as an operator, you got to only succeed to the level at which you can endure a plan never working out. And which is a travesty in the SEAL teams. SEALs hate to plan, because we know 5 seconds. Once I load on your bird, it's never going to work out, because you're going to land wherever the hell you want to land. And it's going to be tragic, and we're probably going to wreck on landing, and not everybody will make it there. And so it became the mantra of the SEAL teams that I still carry with me is adapt. And who cares?
Yeah.
If you're not going to give up, you'll solve it. So who cares what the real plan was supposed to be? Ask for forgiveness. Didn't work out,
Yeah.
boss. We're doing something else. Yeah. That was my first experience.
So, and you mentioned you were a sniper like that was kind of your role. And
Mhm.
this is going to be an ignorant question, so please bear with me. As you describe in the book, you kind of go through the different people in your team in 2009, and they each have different roles: medics, snipers, and then you talk about breachers. And I've noticed the more I talk to operators, there's almost like is it like a rite of passage to become a breacher? Is that a mark of you've exceeded some expectations in some way? Is
Hmm.
that a harder role to get on a team?
No, everybody's a breacher. So, uh, just due to the fact that you have demolition skills and you're paid to be demolition expert as a SEAL, Green Beret, I think, get the same pay. So everybody gets a basic skill set and understanding of the breaching world, which is explosive or mechanical breaching. Like, I want to blow up a door, a wall, or do I want to cut it down with a saw, or blah blah blah. But in combat, uh, breaching takes on a whole different understanding, and because you have to have the ability to give to your platoon or your boss, because you get limited of how you can access a building. The breachers make everything unlimited. Oh, this thing's in the way, and the breacher's got to come up within 3 minutes and solve it. Either ladder over top of it, blow it up, and so the breachers became like angels, and they have an unlimited brain. Their brain's like, in the United States, I can't blow that shit up. You know what I mean? But overseas, they're, I mean, thank God SEALs don't ever unite and become bank robbers, because there's nothing that would stop them. And so I have an affinity for the mindset of a breacher in combat, because he no longer has a limit. He said, "You're gonna let me get away with that? Oh, can we do liquid explosive? Sure. Just don't tell anybody. And don't tell the helo pilots we have this on, because they're never gonna let us on, man." Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Could we fast forward then to the first time you had a trigger pull? I don't know if it was the same deployment or if it was post 9/11, but what was that like, especially as a sniper and the background that you had?
Uh, First time. It's not that I can't say anything about it. It was, to me, rather insignificant. It was in Kosovo, the second deployment, and we were doing stuff, and it was a border mission, and a guy was shooting at us, and to me, it was just all standard, mundane, bang, no emotion to it. It looked cool, because I remember seeing like everything, 65. I know that I executed. I remember 65 of them, and the first one was odd because it felt easier than shooting a deer. Like, it was a lot harder to work up to get to the position and outweigh a deer than, oh my God, the guy's shooting at us. Okay, let's move, maneuver. He's still shooting at us. Okay, bang, shoot him. And but I still think it's much harder mentally and emotionally. And I probably need therapy for this, but to kill an animal, animals are much harder. It doesn't
Yeah.
seem like humans want to survive. They want to die very quickly, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I certainly don't mean to like glorify it. It's just more of you've been training for this for so long. And you in particular have this background where you've been shooting from a young age. I was just curious, kind of like after you have that first trigger pull, you're like, all right, this is where I'm supposed to be in this world. I'm doing this job I'm supposed to be doing. That comes
No, the
through.
first uh, 1, 2, 3 deployments where I squeezed the trigger, it was training. To me, it was the same as training. The only time it became holy shenanigans was in Afghanistan. In Iraq, we were we did like 85 combat missions in Iraq, shooting, getting shot at. Oh, it was cool. It was scary. In Afghanistan, it went from cool and scary to what the fuck just happened. We're My brain can't process what's going on, and there was I think I'm void of emotion. Stacy says I'm pretty sociopathic, and But Afghanistan was a bear. It was a trigger pulling bear.
Let's jump into it, because I mean that is the Unbreakable book and telling that story. And I will just say, as another um, shout out for this book, I don't think I've read about combat experiences in that type of detail, the emotions, like the camaraderie, maybe since like Black Hawk Down, quite honestly. Like the number of missions, I read the first one, I was like, God, how did you guys get out of that? And just thought that the rest would be like much easier in comparison. And they just roll from one hellacious shootout to another. So there's one in particular that I want to ask about, but I'll save that one. If maybe if you could take us into either one that comes to mind, take it any way you want, or the first one that you had, that first mission where you're really in a difficult scenario. But before that, if you could just share the role you're in at the
Mm.
time. And it seemed very special, like the group of people, you'd waited a long time to be there. If you could just talk a little bit about the context and then jump into one of the hairier moments you recall.
So 2009, I was a E7, which is a chief in the Navy, and I had just completed a successful platoon chief assignment at 7 in Iraq, and I got the authority or permission to do another platoon chief slot, which is rare. It's hard to do two, and I don't know why. It wasn't because there was a few chiefs or whatever. So they're like, hey, do you want to stay here and do another platoon chief slot? I'm like, yeah, cool, love to. And the option was to take a senior platoon of operators who I'd never worked with, or take this group that fucking hated each other. Like literally, they hated the guy that uh, they had worked with, and they hated each other. And I'm like, I want them. And they're like, dude, you understand you can get fired. If you don't do well as a platoon chief, you get fired. And I still think there's a 50% fire rate as platoon chiefs in the SEAL team.
Jeez.
Because if you don't have a good platoon chief, everybody's going to die. Like you will die and you'll have problems drinking alcohol and drugs and sex and all that stuff. If a platoon chief is bad, you have problems. And I'm like, dude, I understand their mind. They just have never had an opportunity to fight with somebody who wants to fight, and they've never had anybody love them, like want to go to war with these guys. And I still say that that's rare that you ever get a group of guys that want to be with each other bad enough to sacrifice their life. So I said, hey, I'll take this platoon, but I need some choice. I need some guys to pull with me. And one of the guys that I had met in passing, I say this because it's important not only in the business world, but for operators or for people in the military to understand this. And I never hear it said very well. I'll screw it up, but you have to recruit people, and top leaders have to give their junior leaders the ability to recruit people. And I had told my master chief, I said, hey, I want to go to the medical hold area where all these guys are injured and disillusioned and pissed off, and I want to recruit somebody. So I went there, and there was a guy sitting in the corner that yoked out, cauliflower ears, scars everywhere, neck bigger than his shoulders, hands probably 3 times the size of a bear's paw. And he'd been in a fight and detached his retina. And problem is, he'd been in a fight with 2 other SEALs at a bar. So alcohol related, junior guy, hadn't even gotten his trident, disillusioned. And I'm like, dude, I want to see if he's got fire in him. And I walk up to him and I said, hey, here's the deal. I'm recruiting a guy to be my machine gunner. And he'd been a Marine before. And he looked at me and he goes, can I say something, Chief? And I go, sure. Are you going to go to war? Like, I've been to war 6 times. I think I have a good track record, and I intend to go to war this time. He goes, I'll do whatever you want, only if we're going to war. If we're not going to go to war, I'm getting out of the teams because nobody likes me over here. And I have a terrible record, and I'm not this guy that I look like on paper. I came to fight, and I've never been in a fight before. And I said, okay. And he was a wizard. So in the book, he's salty, and he was a combat wizard. He was the greatest guy ever, and they all became that. So we all did something for each other, and we ended up doing pretty well in situations that we should not have done well in. But whatever story you would like me to tell, they're all to me very visceral stories. So,
Well,
and
I
I don't know
guess
how it reads. By the way, when you're an author, you don't go back and read the book. It's
I'm sure.
tragic. I've never read the book.
No, yeah, I'm dead serious. I mean, it reads like Black Hawk Down, like the intensity. You understand the different players because you lay them out really well, and you move from mission to mission. Um, and I would just, before we jump into that, why did you want to go and recruit someone from the medical hold? What was the desire there?
Because if you can give somebody the ability to do what they really, really want to do, because having been in medical, I became crystal clear of what I really wanted. Having been injured many times, I was crystal clear. And had somebody offered me a hand up, I would have said, oh, well, here's the deal. If you're not the badass, I'm not interested. Like if you're just looking to have another drinking buddy, I'm out. Because I was crystal clear in my mind, having had tough times of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And it was a attempt in the dark. Is somebody here in this position? So I interviewed 8 guys, and the 7 guys I interviewed, I wouldn't walk across the street for.
Wow.
They were disillusioned. They blaming everybody else for their problems, and they wanted out. And they blamed somebody else for their injuries. And I asked, Salty about it. He goes, "Oh no, I got in a fight." I said, "Do you like fighting?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "So tell me about the fight." He goes, "I took out 2 guys in a bar." I'm like, "Why did you fight him?" Which is the reason why I liked him. He's because they offended my girlfriend. That means he's fighting for somebody else. He's not a dumbass. And I I was right, at least on him. I've been wrong about a lot of people, but he was a good dude.
Okay. Well, why don't we certainly, like, you come out of this deployment and it's just fight after fight after fight. So why don't we just jump into the first one? I think it's a mixture. You're with the ODAs,
Mm-hmm.
and they separate your team and mix you in with the ODAs, and you kind of have to make it work, and it's still a brutal fight, right? Like, let's.
No, I think it was not much of a fight. It was a leadership issue. And I'm glad we learned it there. And the leadership issue is equality, which is a big conversation today. Uh, I the senior leaders had convinced themselves that SEALs and Green Beret are equal. In reality, they're not. I don't think anybody, just because you wear a uniform, should be in a conversation called full integration with each other. Like, I love the Marines. I would never operate in their unit because I don't know how they operate. They think different thoughts. So we had positioned ourselves to be fully integrated and at equal basis with guys we'd never ever trained with. One of you, one of me, one of you, one of me. It was tragic. And I saw it 10 steps in. So I pulled all my SEALs out, let the Green Beret. They're awesome. Green Beret's awesome, but you can't put apples and dogs together. It's not orange and orange, apple, red apple, silver apple. It was apples and dogs. We functioned well separately. Even in the same battle space, we functioned well. But at the time, we made a tragic mistake called full integration. Just because, oh, cool, you're in the military. Yeah, it doesn't work out that way. So I pulled all my men out. We're going to do it our way. So we're just going to stay close to each other. And there was actually no real firefighting there, except that when we were cascading off target, two of the Afghani commandos stepped on a pressure plate and blew 4 legs off. A couple of my guys were within 6 feet of them and got bone fragments embedded in their face. And from a leader's point of view, I had that written in stone. Full integration causes problems. We'll never do it again. So it was not. I wanted to. I put that in the book for my kids because that was the first mission, and with the intent, be very careful what you believe in the world. I don't know how it gets edited, and I did read the book several times during the editing process, but
No,
the
you're right.
intent there was to share openly with my kids the tragedy of leadership.
And I should have mentioned when I started talking about the book that it's written in an interesting way in that you are writing it as a lesson to your kids to some effect, right? Like, these are the things I've learned. I want to share them with you. And so it kind of has this very unique way of delivering the information that makes it stand out.
Yeah, I wrote it for my kids because each mission, it wasn't clear I was going to come back. And with the intent, like lesson 1, if I don't come home, please learn how to do this. Lesson 2, please learn how to do this. And then I came home and it sat on the shelf in crayon and different, email chains, and with no intent that any human being ever read it. But it was solely to my kids and to my wife.
And now that I'm thinking of it, you describe a large multi-force, I guess an air assault, like 200 operators going in one case.
Oh, that's
right?
the third mission.
Yeah. So let's talk about that one, because there's a complexity aspect, because you are working with other teams, and it's hellacious. Like, let's talk through that one then.
Well, so you and I are going to now make a lot of enemies, and I'm all about it. I love it. So I got the Silver Star for another mission. And in that other mission, it's chapter 9 in the book. We got overrun by Taliban, and I had to call a 2,000-pound bomb on our position, and we ran out of food, water, and ammo, and we were screwed. So I'm like, hey, kill them. I'm not going to become a prisoner. So I ended up getting a Silver Star for that. That was not the most difficult mission. That was just overwhelmed. You know what I mean? When you get overwhelmed, it doesn't matter how tactical you are. Your experience means shit. You have no ammo. And so I had just fought till we had nothing left and got my guys' agreement. We're going to drop a 2,000-pound bomb on us with the intent that we're going to die. We didn't die. Cool. So here's your award. It was written up as a Navy Cross, got downgraded to a Silver Star because nobody died except the enemy. And I heard a lot of people say, dude, that should be a Medal of Honor. I'm like, I wouldn't take it. That's embarrassing. But anyway, so the third mission that we're on was, to me, the military mission of the century in my brain. Coordinated, impactful, historic, biggest drug bust in U.S. military history. And it was supposed to have strategic effect, which it did. So we took over the capital. I'm sure there's some Taliban listening now. Here's my address and phone number. So we were to take over the capital of Helmand Province, which All the Marines in the world that have been over in Afghanistan know, and they're scared when that word comes up because they know it's fighting for days. Take over the capital, Helmand Province, a place called Marja. And after the drug buyers bought all the black tar opium from the farmers, so everything's centrally located in one position. The Marines couldn't get there. They're they were beaten back every time. The mission was to six MH-47 helos loaded to bear, land on the X, and the X means within 150 yards of target, and take over the capital. And the only way to do it was to land everybody, all six helos, in a field on the eastern sector of the capital. In theory, we were supposed to be there for 2 days. So we loaded up for firefight 2 days and knew that we were going to get resupplied at least once. And I'm like, 2 days. We don't need any sleep. Cool. And you don't really. You can sustain yourself for at least 3 days in stress. And so we notionally went in there for 2 days. We landed on the eastern sector. My job was to secure a building, maintain it, blow up the road, put a machine gun down there to prevent vehicle traffic from coming in. And we landed at 4 o'clock, and we were all carrying 280 more pounds, which is tragic. So it's so tragic that you can't do anything with it. So we get off the helo, drop our gear 100 yards from the building because you can't move up next to the building, take down the building. A guy in the building had an S-vest on, was carrying two kids, had to shoot him. His S-vest doesn't go off, but we had to have EOD go in there and secure it. And meanwhile, all the Green Beret are waiting for this building to be secured. Finally get all that to happen. The clearance now happens to secure the village. I had no idea. I was just to stay in that eastern sector building with my 9 operators, on 9 SEALs. And so what we did then was, the only place to see it was either through the walls or put up a sniper position. So we put up 2 sniper positions within 20 minutes, which is sandbags, because that's all you could do. 3 sandbags high, 4 would have caved in the roof. So 3 sandbags high, which means if you know the height of a sandbag, that means you're laying down. And by 5:30, we were taking our first rounds at us. So my snipers were up there shooting. Meanwhile, we're trying to knock holes in the wall so that everybody else could afford themselves an opportunity to shoot at somebody. And the first tick was over by 6:30, and my snipers had killed 11 guys. And I'm like, wow, this is real. And we're like, hey, guys, don't shoot at anything you can't kill. We don't have enough ammo. Like the first time it had occurred to me in my life, it's not training. You can't go over to the truck and get more. I'm like, dang, we're loaded. We knew we were going to be here for 2 days, but we were 3-to-1 ratio, 3 shots for 1 impact. And I was like, hey guys, slow down. And so we mounted a 50 cal machine gun in a room and knocked the wall down so that we could port the gun. We ended up shooting in 3 days, 5,800 50 cal rounds. And because we were in firefight 4 times a day for the first 3 days, every 2.5 hours, we were in a firefight on our position, shooting where everybody was mounted and shooting. And each day we ran out of food, water, and ammo. Had nothing. And I was a chief trying not to shoot, and I had ran out of rounds every day. And personally, during that 5-day adventure, I killed 12 guys, and I wasn't even supposed to be doing it. my snipers were like making names for themselves. I'm like, oh my God, guys. And what I found was interesting during that period of time is every minute was an hour. And in that minute, everybody was living the last moment of their life. And in those last moments that you live, you become very affectionate, not weirdly, but very open with the guys around you. And the only reason that you stay there is because they need you. And that concept of being needed by another human being keeps the fight alive in you because you got nothing left. The first night, which was cool, we ran out, we survived. First night, it's dark. It was 140 degrees the whole day, 140.
Jesus.
And I ran out of water at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, we're going to die of dehydration well before anything else that happens here. So we were drinking the dirty water out of the yellow buckets that were in the compound. It could have been piss. I have no idea. It was horrible. Like I'll die of dehydration before infection. And so we were all drinking curdled milk and whatever the hell they had there. And so the nighttime comes, it cools down to around 90 degrees. However, we have to get resupplied. And the resupply landed right out in that field that we've been killing Taliban, 100 yards from us. So it's scattered from 400 yards to the left and 500 yards to the right. 18, I think 18 pair bundles were dropped. And it took us from dark to dark to get them all. So now and people don't understand this about operators in combat, and you as a pilot know that you don't get sleep. Prepping for a mission, you guys get sleep more than we did. But
yeah,
I was like 24 hours before mission, I'm prepping. So now we're 24 hours into the mission. So we've all been awake for 48 hours. That night, we're still awake, going into the next day with no sleep and tired. And now we're angry, going, God damn, I hate all this stuff. I don't want to be here anymore. I mean, that's really what you think about. And the sun comes up and we're in another tick. And it's big because now the Taliban know where we are. They're pissed off that we got all their drugs. And 5:45, second morning, we have 18 platforms above us. And by the grace of God, we get 2 A-10s on our side. And I mean, I don't know why anybody ever get rid of an A-10. They're the greatest combat machine in the history of combat machines. And they actually look like they're enjoying themselves. And so we had an east-west running road, and they would strafe that road with their main gun. Problem is, we were right under their main gun, so we were getting the brass right on us. And they would drop like 100 feet every time they would shoot. And I'm like, God, he's coming to drop right in our compound. But they were killing a lot of guys that we needed to affect that. And they were dropping bombs and we Winchestered 18 platforms.
Jesus. And just for those who are listening who don't know what that is, Winchester is you're out of ammo.
We made sure they all left clean and ready to go home and take a nap. And so now we were the big game in town. So everybody was cycling out there. We had probably another 15 or 20, 18 miles out, ready to come in, different grids. And I wasn't coordinating. I was just coordinating my guys. I was hearing it in one ear. Oh my God, well, who's that? And so we got some really affectionate Apache pilots that were female. Ugly 01 and 02 were their call signs, which is so cool. And so they became our combat partners for the next 6 months out of that trip to Marja. And so at the end of 5 days, we had killed 212 Taliban.
Jesus.
And the guys were done. They're literally going, you know what? I've played in the Super Bowl and I don't care about anything anymore. So I knew things were going to go south. So we all the leadership said, let's take 7 days off. Let's not talk about it. We have to write reports on it, but after that, let's talk about girls, boy, whatever. But let's not talk about combat for 7 days. And that was the most brutal firefight that I'd ever witnessed in my life.
So I want to touch on a couple things here. First of all, that super interesting to hear that perspective just off the cuff. There's a quote from the book that I think is in this moment where you're looking up, you're on a ladder, you're kind of looking out into the field, you turn around and A-10's coming in to do a strafe run, and you say, I knew I was where I needed to be and had spent my entire life training and waiting for the happy chaos. As shell casings are raining down on you and you fall back on the ladder and land like on your body armor, basically. What really stuck out to me, and I didn't have this experience as a pilot because everything we're doing is so dynamic. We're just moving all the time. You don't have to place someone in a position and then talk to them and then come back to them and talk to them again about what they're doing. So a few of the things that I found really interesting to hear was the human connection aspect that you touched on, especially the first time someone's shot someone else. You talk about going and just getting eye to eye with them to make sure that they're still connected, basically.
Yeah. So by then, I had been in, over 200 different combat engagements. There were guys in my platoon who had not seen or witnessed or done the killing side of the business. And I didn't know how it was going to play out. And in that mission in Marja, it played out. Everybody got a bit of piece of that loving, whether they wanted to or not. And I was like, man, this could go south. You don't know what's going to happen to the mind. It's cool if you get a day of doing it, but 5 days, in my brain on day 3, I remember thinking, if we don't make this a human experience, I was telling my lieutenant this, if we don't make sure they're okay, they could just shoot themselves. Because the human brain can't process, oh my God, I got another 2 days of this. Yeah. So I literally checked in with everybody with the intent to bring back some human factor of, hey, what's going on? And the only way I could process doing that is the way that people did that with me when I had been shooting deer, my uncles and my friends, and they're like, make it human. And the only way to do that is you got 5 senses that make you human. And hey, how did that look to you? Not how it felt, because I don't know. Humans can't deal with their own feelings well. How do you feel about that? Fuck, I don't. I still hate when somebody asks me that. And how did it look? Tell me how that looked to you. And did you smell it? And then they're checking in with, gosh, I've lost my sense of smell. And then they would panic. And I just kept making simple conversation with them. And what I found out, the greatest form of leadership is when they don't really need you to tell them tactics. They just need you to remind them that everything's alive. And they'll tell you what they want. And what I was in such a weird phenomenon for me is I thought it was going to be a profound thing. Hey, dudes, what do y'all need? Like, hey, we need bullets. We need this. Dude, can you come up here for a second? Yeah. And a guy would be like, hey, remember that girl that I was dating? I was like, what the fuck, dude? What do you need? He didn't need anything, but he had lost his human thing. Like, I can do this shooting all day long, but if I don't have anything to go back to in my brain, I'm going to lose it. So we would be up there talking about beer or girls or, whoever's listening, they would want to talk about boobs. I didn't write that in the book. It got edited out. They're like, man, I remember that one girl and I didn't know her. Okay, that's cool. And then a guy that ended up tragically dying in another deployment was my greatest guy in the world named Nike, or in the book it was
Yeah.
Nike, but in reality his name is Mike Tatham. I can say that because he's dead. So
Mhm.
uh, he and I just talked about life in the middle of firefights, and he got so tragically bent that he didn't have a can of Copenhagen. I thought he was going to lose it. So we're fighting. I mean, we're in the moment of fighting up on a roof. There's three guys to my right that in his field of fire. There's two guys in mine. They're shooting at us within 100 yards and maneuvering on us. And we're taking rounds like crazy. So I got my two guys and I'm look over there. I can't quite get my gun over to shoot at his. And he shoots one and I kind of peek over and I see him go down. There's two other guys now that were within 50 yards and they're running towards us open. I'm like, man, I should pop up and shoot him. And he comes up to a knee and he goes, I'm done. I'm like, Mike, get down. He goes, I need a can of Copenhagen and I want one right now. And I'm fumbling around trying to find mine. And I find it and I like have the most wimpy throw in the world and it lands in front of him. And he's like, dude, really? You could hand it to me. And he's calm and demeanor when he's saying this. And rounds are going right by his head. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? I didn't know what to do as a leader. I'm like, hey, you can have the whole can if you want. Because I figured that's what he wanted to talk about. So he literally put the whole can of Copenhagen in his mouth and he calmed down and then calmly raised his gun and shot the other two guys. And I'm like, this is the weirdest situation I've ever experienced. They didn't need me to lead. They didn't need that. They needed to know I was there and their next step in their life was going to be okay. Like, if we go back, am I going to be okay? And can I talk to human things? Because when you kill a bunch of people, you actually think that you're like, am I going to be okay with this? Gosh, is my girlfriend that I've never met going to be okay with this? And those are the conversations that we had in Marja. And it was, to me, it was the weirdest phenomenon. I tried to express that in the book, and I don't know how well it went.
No, it comes through. And I just think there are such good leadership lessons for somebody in a platoon, a squad, team, platoon level. Such good lessons about just checking on people when they need something, get it to them right away. Like if they're rolling off and they're tired and you're relieving them, like get a survey of the battlefield. Like all these basic things that I'm sure you learn in training that you finally apply and you just see it in this real world environment that makes it unique. And I wanted to ask, you mentioned your LT, and you have a comment in the book where
Oh God.
I think you say he's the only officer I've known that I admire and see eye to eye with. And
Yeah, here we
so,
go. This is where I'm going to lose a lot of friends, but go ahead.
oh, no. All right.
Go
Well,
ahead, please. No.
I guess my question is, and I'll put it this way, for a young officer out there, whether they're a SEAL, they're in an Army platoon or Marine, and you're taking up a platoon leader or company command position to win the trust of someone like you, what was it that he brought that you had an affinity for or that worked with you?
So I had put him through training when I was an instructor, and he was a demonstratively great athlete, which isn't rare. Most of the academy guys, because of the prep time, show up to training really a head above athletically. And when he came to the platoon, we had our initial meeting, and I I let him meet my wife first, and he goes, "Don't you think we should have a leadership meeting first?" I'm like, "Nope. First meeting is I want you to come over, and we're gonna have dinner." So he comes over. It wasn't uncomfortable, but he gets to meet my family and met Stacy, and then we went on the back porch, and I literally said this: "Here's the deal. This is just my experience of it. The whole thing is between you and I. It's all about you and I. It's not about them. It's about you and I. If you and I disagree on something, I'm going to win This isn't about you, your career. This is about you and I figuring out how to agree. If we disagree, I win, by the way. You may
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
I'm going to win, and if I ever win, you will lose sight of your career. The men will lose sight of themselves, and people are going to die. So let's not make it about being right or even me being right. Let's make it about our desire to be with each other. He goes, what do you mean? I said, so what did you do at the academy? He goes, well, I was on the triathlon team. I said, that ain't a team. Y'all didn't demand something from each other. You pushed each other, which is cool. So here in the SEAL platoons, it's about each other. You cannot ever let somebody down, and they're going to fuck everything up. They're going to screw up everything. In the SEAL teams, it's about how much you can screw up and get away with it, not how pristine anything is. And he's like, what do you mean? We're here to make mistakes. It's going to look horrible to you. It's going to be terrible. Guys are going to make mistakes. Then you spend time with them. If they need help, you don't go home. And thank God he wasn't married. But I said, we're here for them. I'm not here for the skipper. I could give a shit less to what he thinks. He'll fire me if he wants to. I don't care if he does. I don't care what my mass chief thinks of me. I care what you and I think about ourselves and about them. And I said, you got to get to know them. Not by I don't ever recommend letting them call you Brian. Sir, LT, bro is okay in the teams. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you need to get to know them. What drives them? Go get to meet their girlfriend, their kids. And I said this, when they die, you fucking show up. He goes, what do you mean? They could die. And then you have to go talk to their wife about the fact that you're alive and he's dead. Brian's like, what the hell? I'm like, this is serious business, man. The serious business. From the time we start until we disband, it's all about these simple things that a lot of people don't like to talk about. And we got along, and he let me do my thing, and he let us fail and we failed a lot, but we failed so quickly at things we learned. And I said, don't cover this up. You can cover it up, on paper, but don't cover this up, and never hold a grudge. Somebody fuck it up, go, hey, cool, love it. Let's go solve it. They could screw it up again. That means they screwed it up the first time, even though it's the second time. And he goes, God, that's a terrible way to be. I'm like, remember, these guys, they're not academy boys. They're people that probably should be in jail, and that you want them to push and fall and pick themselves back up and know that you're going to be there, and you're supposed to be there when they don't want you there, because they're going to fight you too. And it's okay to fight with them. It's okay to push them and be in a pissy match with them, and then put your lieutenant bar back on and go, okay, this is over. This is what we're going to do. And oddly, we never had those skirmishes that happened quite a bit. And we didn't argue about anything the whole time until the very end. But I truly enjoyed him as a human being too.
If this might be unfair to ask, I don't know how you would approach it, but if you didn't have an E7 like yourself who came up and said that, and you are a young officer, how do you have that conversation with your platoon sergeant or your chief, your E7?
If the chief or the senior enlisted guy doesn't bring it up first, oh man, I don't know how it would be directed top down. Like, I don't know if it's possible, because that would be so inauthentic for a guy that's not done. He's only done one platoon to come up with, this is the way things are. Dude, you're still shitting and wiping with, your academy stuff on, and that would be like a pilot that just, I don't know. And my daughter's now at Rutger going through pilot training. And
Wow.
I know some some warrant officers. Reason why I articulated Alaska, the best pilots I've ever met on the planet are up there. I have no idea why. What the fuck are you going up there? They still don't know why. They can do things that you can't teach. And when they say something, there's learning. You can't get a captain to go to a CW05 and go, hey, Warrant, here's how things go. So a lot of things have to happen sequentially, and the sequence of great leadership in the military has got to come from experience. Sometimes colonels can have that, but by the time you're a colonel, you're not a tactician. So you're never going to be talking to the E5, 6, 7, whatever.
Yep.
But that's I think it's also the tragedy of the military system. Puts too much weight on junior officers and not enough on the senior enlisted tactician. Like the Israelis do it the opposite. All their experience would be called a sergeant or a chief. They call them officers. So their leaders are ranked officers.
Mm-hmm.
In our military, they would be enlisted guys.
Yeah.
And
I think the Air Force does it that way too. The U.S. Air Force, they're all officers as they're flying. And so it's a different dynamic. As you advance, in rank, you advance in that leadership role as well. So it's a little different. Yep. Okay. Mindful of time, I had one other combat experience I just wanted to talk about. I don't know if it's on the mission where you get your Silver Star, but it's when you go up against this foreign fighter who is also a sniper. And as I recall reading in the book, it's kind of like you're this U.S. sniper, you got this guy on the other side who's got you he's got you ranged out at like 700 yards, I think, in a small area. And I was just wondering.
It was the mission of Silver Star. What got us in the position where we were pinned down is they had the high ground the entire time and we had the low ground, but we couldn't change that dynamic. At the end of the day of that fighting, we had dropped our guard and they didn't. So we got initially hammered with big barrage of RPGs and bullets and machine guns. And I jumped in through a window into this room where the conversation happens, or I was pinned in a room conversation. So I got blown into a room. I'm laying on the ground and I'm dazed and confused and believing that I'm dead. And I rallied, and in the process of rallying, I go up next to this window that I'd gotten blown through, and one round just misses my eye by like 1.5 inches. I'm like, ooh, could have been a ricochet. You never know. So the only way to test that is you got to hold something else up there to see what their abilities are. So I'm in the room. I hold up actually it was a bucket, and one round right through the middle of the bucket. And I'm like, okay, due to the angle of that impact, that's that hill that I'd been watching the whole day. I'm like, damn, 635 yards away. Okay. He knows where I am, but I now know where he is. So can I get to him before he gets to me? And I'm like, okay, I've done this in my brain 1.5 million times. So I'm in the room now, and everywhere there's blankets, because they're Afghani blankets, guys. Afghan has blankets. So I put a blanket over my head, or it could have been a rug, and I cut a hole in the blanket and poked my gun barrel through it and cut another hole so that my scope could see through. So I'm thinking the only thing he could see is this blanket. And if I move slow enough, it will just look like a blanket. It won't look like a ghost moving in the space. So I'm laying on the ground trying to position myself so I can see this hill. So I'm moving around in the shadows of the back of the room, and I finally see the right side of the base of the hill. And I'm looking through the window up at an angle. I see the right side of the hill, and I'm just watching. And because at 600 yards, it's still hard to see detail. And I'm not seeing anything and not seeing anything, not seeing any muzzle flash, no puffs of smoke, no nothing. So I eke my way right a little bit more, and I see more of the hill. And I do it again, see the hilltop now ain't on the right side of that hill. And I'm watching and watching, and then nothing is on the right side of that hill. As I come out a little further, I'm like, okay, there's the light coming through the window is 2 inches more. As I come right, I'm going to get into the light where he'll either see more of me or he'll see my scope reflect or some shenanigans. And so I still can't see anything, but I have a little bit left of the hilltop. And I remember the left side of the hilltop, there was a rock outcropping on the left side. I'm like, fuck, I know that's where he is, because that's where I would be. Like, dude, the only way to see it is now to go into the light. And I'm like, okay, here it is. This is the moment. And it's like orchestrated. Okay, here's the deal, Thom. You're going to move out there. You better see him. So I'm going through my shot sequence. I'm pressing my trigger back already. I move out a little bit. I don't see anything. Calm down again. 2 more breaths. I move out there and I see a helmet and a gun. Squeeze my trigger and a bullet hits my helmet and embeds right next to my gun in the ground. And I'm like, oh, he hit me. I'm like, well, I've never been shot. It probably penetrated my head because my helmet's gone and I'm laying back down, staring at the ground going, oh, damn, this must be what it's like to be shot. And I can't feel anything. And then I put my hand up on my head. I'm like, oh. And I pulled it away. There's no blood. And I'm like, wow, man, he missed. And I'm like, and I'm processing it going, shit, the only problem is I don't know if I shot him. I haven't solved any problems except now he knows exactly where I'm shooting from. So that I had to do it again. I'm not scared. The only time I've ever felt fear is in that moment. Like I was crippled, like I couldn't get my heart to stop. And I felt like my eyes were going like this, like I couldn't get them from crossing. I'm like, I can't figure out what's going on. My hands weren't shaking, but I couldn't get my body to process it. And I'm like, I got to do this again. So I started breathing and got the gun under me and pulled out there, saw the helmet again, sent another round. And in the process of that round flying, my brain started processing it again. And I'm looking and there's blood all over the rocks behind him. And he's humped over his gun. And then I see that round hit. So I sent like 4 more rounds. And I know 2 rounds hit him. The other ones, they could have been out in China. I never saw where they went. And so I stood up in the back of the room and I was like, holy Christ. And I started shaking. And had I had anything in my bladder, I probably would have pissed. And then the rest of the 35 minutes that were left, it was me rallying the guys. And we ran out. We threw grenades over the wall. We threw 40 Mike over. We shot 38 60 millimeter mortars, ran out of everything. B-1 bomber checks on. He drops a bomb and crushes the enemy, and we all survived.
God. All right. Super interesting story, especially the way it's conveyed in the book and how you just told it. And just so that you have the rest of your day back there, I'm going to wrap this up with just a couple things. And if someday, Thom, you allow me to interview you again, there are certain things I'd like to touch on because I feel like they deserve more time, including choosing the right spouse for this role. And I think like your description of the relationship you have with Stacy and how you were able to like immerse yourself in this environment and succeed is a great lesson that a lot of people should learn when they're younger. And then allowing people to make decisions and figure it out when you have these experts around you. Like you and the LT don't have to figure everything out. These guys will figure out a solution the way you've alluded to before with the breacher. But just so that you can have your day back, I want to jump to some of the work you're doing now. I know you have a newer book, 3 Simple Things. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you just want to share a little bit about what that is and how it evolved from Unbreakable.
So Three Simple Things is a process and method that I've designed that I took from the SEAL teams to improve your life, your health, your ability to make money, your ability to have great, profound relationships, your spiritual connection, and your ability to learn. So I call it 5 areas, and it's a process. And in the past 6 years, I've trained 290 some executives by following this process. And the process up until this year took a year. And I was just training executives or professional athletes to follow a really simple process that makes you lethal. And it 2X's those areas of your life. Now it's a 9-month or a 90-day process. And before it was a year, tragically, because I was stupid. And, the book is just straightforward. It was written because a bunch of my SEAL buddies were committing suicide, and we're sitting around a table talking about what would happen if we all did something stupid and killed ourselves. And I'm like, God, man, I just designed this beautiful process to make life better because I proved it 200 plus times. And they're like, hey, why don't you write another book about it? I'm like, fuck, then I won't be able to teach it. It won't have any secret anymore. And they're like, man, one of the guys, the SEAL that I have been working with, he goes, the shit's so hard anyway. It doesn't matter if you put it down. So yeah. So 3 simple things: leading during chaos. However, I want to, if anybody's survived the first hour and a half of this, I want to say something. The book Unbreakable was titled Spartan Wife, and it didn't make it through the publishing debacle because they didn't think that was going to sell. But I wanted my kids to know that women make men. And I've never, ever seen that not be the case. Bad women make bad men. And I had come out of even though I take 100% ownership in my first relationship, it was 100% me, not her. It was bad because I was a dumbass. When I met Stacy, I'd finally met somebody who wanted me to be me. She didn't want to change anything. She wanted more of it, and allowed me to be better and better and better and better and better at my craft. And even though we weren't together often, we were very close and very intimate and loving each other. And I loved everything. I still love everything that she does. And that can happen to anybody. Everybody should have that experience in their life. And I see that in the great executives that I coach, that if they don't have it, I don't coach them. Like, the only thing we're going to work on is this. It's easy to make money. It's easy to get you in shape. But if you don't have a good wife or a good husband, in some cases, everything that we're going to do is going to fall apart. And I try to make a more profound statement about that in the second book. But women are the key, and nobody's saying it. I've seen greatest warriors in the world not have strong women, and they're tragically, they can only do one thing good one time, as opposed to 25 to 30 years of being a great, dad or warrior. It comes from the woman. And I wish somebody would help teach that. It's probably
It comes
women are tragically not doing it. Damn it.
I feel like it should be reading at the academies, maybe like, hey, as you're making these big decisions,
They don't want anybody to be involved. They want them to love the Army or Navy.
It's going to happen though.
Yeah.
So you may as well do it right.
It's true. Yep.
Okay. I always try to ask just 2 questions. They're pretty quick, Thom.
Yep.
One is, was there anything that you always carried with you into combat that had sentimental value, a talisman, good luck charm, something like that?
No, I was the opposite. I took my ring off and took any attachment to human life away from me for the time that I was in combat. So from the time I was a junior guy, I would take anything that reminded me of life away until I got back. So I tragically was the opposite of that. I didn't believe in having any attachments. And I went out on every mission not anticipating that I'd come home, which I think makes you better.
Yeah. And then pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I like to ask it regardless. You know, if you go back, you went through Buds 5 times, which I can't even imagine the one time. The experiences you've had, the people you've lost in these fights. Would you go back and do it all again?
I would have done it out of high school. The value of what I went through and the great experiences. I wish I would have started earlier, but there may be a meaning for failure. Sometimes it's good to fuck shit up so often that you appreciate it better when you finally get it. Cause I know a lot of guys that make it through SEAL training as an 18-year-old and they do well on the teams, but they don't know how rough things can get. And so they're a different type of operator or leader, and they're less human related and less affectionate to various things. But would I do it again? Yeah. When I couldn't do it anymore, I stopped. Like I didn't want to cling on and just be that dude in the teams that, like, what the fuck is he doing here? When I finally put down my gun, I said it's not worth being in the teams. Being a leader without a gun is not something that I want to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for the time, Thom. The book's great. We'll definitely have links to it for people to get a hold of. And then obviously 3 simple things that they can look at as well. Thank you for the time and the sharing these stories with us.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate what you've done.